wonderful ideas and suggestions for guests and topics.
Great events, programs, and
All the countries are listening.
Welcome to this week's segment of Dialogue Houston. I'm your host, Lawrence Payne. To our regular viewing audience, welcome. To those joining us after the first time here for ACC's TV Dialogue Houston, we can be found now every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., and also on Saturday afternoons at 3 p.m. As always, on top of the hour, let me thank you for your thoughtful calls, emails, and text messages concerning previous shows that we've aired here on ACC's TV Dialogue Houston, but particularly your great ideas for topics, guests, and subjects to be covered on upcoming segments of Dialogue Houston. So after all, this is your community affairs, public affairs show here on ACC TV, proudly in its 29th year. We kicked off our 30th season in January. We have a great show lined up for you today. I'm very happy and proud to have two wonderful individuals with us to share their understanding of the reality of the world around us as we continue to work through this myriad of polarization and other issues that we're facing. And they are two wonderful people involved in the EDD program, the PhD program at the University of St. Thomas on ethical leadership. Joining us today is Mark Amelang and Reverend Sandra Hall, both in the program, and they'll kind of tell you where they are in the program and their dissertation topic. But just let me stop there and say a general welcome to both Mark and Sandra. Welcome. You're engaged in this wonderful process at the University of St. Thomas, who has this great leadership program, the only ED around that you can get in ethical, yes, I said ethical leadership, with a strong concentration in social justice. So tell us about that, if you will.
It's a fantastic program. Sandra and I are enjoying it immensely. It's at the University of St. Thomas, as you pointed out, and it is a program dedicated to the advancement of ethical leadership and social justice. It's a unique program in that it's completed in 3 years. We write our dissertation at the same time that we're taking classes. There's a broad range of classes, and it's a very engaging and obviously a very intense process, but well worth it, well worth the effort.
I agree, Mark. And not only that, it's very student oriented. That's what I love about the program, because I have many friends who've participated in doctoral programs, but none have the support that we have ongoing, walking through the process of writing our dissertation. So it has been an awesome experience for me, and I highly recommend the program to anyone that's interested, especially if your passion is ethical leadership.
Wonderful. So let me ask both of you, what led you to this program? Because you both have a very interesting backgrounds before you even thought about doing this program. What led you to do this program?
Well, Larry, I spent 30 years in the energy industry, traveling the world and run very large corporations and sales organizations, marketing organizations, and those kind of thing, and really all major theaters of the world where there's oil and gas. And one of the things that I noticed is the abject poverty in so many of the places that I traveled. And in addition, the decisions that are being made by not only corporate leadership, but also governmental leadership being so flawed and so self-centered, and adding to the agony of the poverty that's out there. One of the common denominators that I saw was that education seemed to be really the factor that made all the difference. If you can get the kids educated, get them off to college and get them in a career, it made all the difference. And so that's why I decided to get my degree in my doctorate in ethical leadership, to help make a difference and help steer corporations towards making ethical decisions, and help the young children get a good education and an equitable education, because that's harder and harder to do in today's world.
Yes, it is. Thank you for that, Mark. Dr. Hall, Reverend Hall?
I've been an educator for over 27 years, and I also had a dual occupation of being an educator and being a pastor. So I was a school counselor. And so I had this great passion to advocate for parents and students, and then found the collaboration with my colleagues. And I found that some of the same things I was dealing with in the school, many of my parishioners were dealing with their children. And so when I noticed this program and researched it, I thought this is an excellent way to blend the religious concepts and the educational concepts together to help people in the community and in the church environment.
Well, thank you for that. Before we get into the particulars of your research and your work, let's frame a larger context for the text we're going to share this afternoon. This polarized society that we're in, and the issues of black and white and not seeing any gray, or understanding everything in terms of blue and red rather than looking for purple. There's no sense of common goals and objectives to be met, no sense of the common good for the community at large. So much of this is socially, economically, and politically driven as to why things aren't happening and what needs to happen. The question of equity that you both have spoken to, particularly in the area of poverty and education, is really the real issue on the table that no one really seems to want to deal with properly. So in that environment and in that context comes now your wonderful work and research and dissertation. So let's talk about how you see those things adding up in the work you're doing. Mark, I'll start with you. And I'm really curious to hear you talk about both of your dissertation projects.
I'm very passionate about education and about equality. What my research is centered on is the idea of ethical leadership development and the role that it plays in sustainable engagement of and student success of high school students in the Houston area. So what I'm studying is the idea of an evolution of a child in education and how it can lead to really a social change in the end. It starts with the individual. The theoretical framework that I'm using for my study and the conceptual framework that I created from it starts with the individual. And if we can take the individual student and we can give that student the ability to have a consciousness of self, to look at themselves and to act in a way that they're thinking and be congruent with themselves. And if they can learn then to commit to something and achieve something, then we've got a real start in life. And that leads them to the group setting in the schools. And then they can take that commitment and learn to commit to a common goal with others. And in doing that, they learn to collaborate and they learn to handle conflict with civility, and they learn how to work together to get a goal accomplished. Once we master that effort, then you start looking at naturally other people and that I exist in the world. And there's the environment, there's political activity, there's, maybe I'll run for student council, or maybe I'll volunteer for a political campaign, or maybe I'll do a homeless shelter visit or make sandwiches for others. But that idea of engaging in the world around you is the third level really of development. And that in turn gives you more confidence in yourself and in your abilities and in your congruency, and it helps you collaborate better with others. So it's a circular development cycle that ends in social change. So the idea that I have in my study is if we can get kids through that and become adults and become educated, then we'll be committed to making a difference in the world and to bringing about social change and equality. So
let me ask this. The wonderful process that you described and the circle and all that you just laid out, that's how probably you and I are probably around the same age. Mm-hmm. That's how we grew up. Yeah. I mean, that was part of how my whole life was formed and shaped every single day.
Absolutely.
But we've gotten so far away from that, and there's no one to teach those lessons many times. Poverty has done such a horrible thing to families and the separation of families and single mother. I mean, it's just to the point that who teaches those lessons anymore?
Wow.
Well, we're precluded from doing that in the public schools because we don't have time for that. We're teaching to the test. So we actually used to do that even in public schools. And we used to talk about, we used to have family oriented discussions and talk about doing good and doing right and those things. We're no longer allowed to do that. So we just talk about the education itself, period. And research has shown that typically that does not lead to success. And what it has led to is people of color, students of color, are typically around 20% behind their white cohorts. So we're seeing this great divide being exacerbated by this no child left behind mentality that we're just gonna focus on education. And rather than focusing on educating the whole child and getting them, as you said, with all this understanding of doing the right thing and becoming a responsible human being, we're just teaching them how to do math and reading. And,
Right.
and if they can't keep up, then, oh, well, sorry. We'll
Social
move on to the
emotional
next
learning
person.
social emotional learning is out. Reverend Hall, you wanted to jump into this, I could tell. Go ahead.
I want to just comment to what he says. I was a school counselor, so I'm always addressing the issue of teaching the whole child. But for me, not just teaching the whole child, but becoming a collaborative front for the parents as well. We have to also teach the parents how to connect with the education system, that their children can get the most out of the system.
Why do you think that's not happening?
I think a couple of reasons why. I think it's not happening because I'm an educator, so I'm going to say this with some authority. I think it's not happening because we are so accustomed to following directions of the district and the state that we're leaving out our heart to guide and lead and teach the child, because children come to school with all kinds of deficits. And so therefore, if I didn't eat last night, I can't learn to read today probably. So we need to look at every aspect of the child, and that's going to require you to work. When I was a school counselor, my job was just not doing guidance lessons. My job was to make sure that every child that I came in contact had a wonderful day. And if that meant to hold Johnny close to my heart for a few moments, or to reassure him that everything's going to be all right, to teach him that maybe you don't learn at the same pace as somebody else learns, but you can learn, and patiently wait for that process to take place, that's what we have to do. And stop putting everybody in the same box.
It strikes me more and more that the public educational system really needs to be revamped, overhauled, and looked at in a different way of the goals it's trying to accomplish from a social emotional learning, from a social economic and even political perspective. And then look at what is the hardcore educational component that every child needs to know to be able to earn a degree and have a living and get a job and take care of themselves. It's kind of out of whack. It's the cart and the horse have kind of gotten in the wrong position.
Yeah. And when you follow those schools that have had what quote unquote the turnaround schools,
right?
The one thing that has happened there with these turnaround schools is that they have made the children the priority.
Right.
And the children have bought into the system, and they make them feel valued, and therefore their confidence level rises. When a child believes in themselves, they learn better.
Yeah.
I don't care how structured or how difficult the curriculum is, they learn better, even in the inner city. My whole career has been in inner city schools. My whole career. And I have seen some of the schools I worked at go from kids not being able to read at all. One school had a 76% of special education students, and during the tenure that I was there for 10 years, that percentage went down. But we had a principal who truly loved kids, and her concern, she was willing to buck the system. Let me just use that word. Where she was willing to tell the superintendent what she wasn't going to do. But but the progress was so awesome there. The culture of the school changed, the community changed, and so the children changed.
Right. But you hit a important component. That instructional leader, i.e. the principal, without that right component in place, that doesn't happen. Unless
Yes.
you have that kind of leadership in that school or any school who understands that role that you just described, to be the change barrier, to buck the system, to be the change agent, to
Yes.
be the disruptor, to ask the hard questions and not take the okey doke answer on first blush, nothing happens.
Yeah.
And so as we move into this discussion a little further, and I want to stop and put a pause right there for a moment to let you talk about your dissertation and your work, because it fits in so well when you mentioned a minute ago about special education children. Please do so.
My work is primarily on the parental perception of special education, advocacy, and support for early child elementary student needs. And it's because I believe that early intervention is a primary factor that helps to eliminate students being caught in the system forever. The object of a child being a child with special needs, of course, you want to identify they have needs, but at some point you want them to be able to move into the mainstream part of education at some point. And so the issue that I'm addressing or having is that that parents don't always understand the entirety of the laws that govern special education. So therefore, they are a stakeholder also. And if they cannot adequately participate in the conferences, then how can they give their children the advocacy that they need to support their educational needs?
Right.
And having set the table for many, many years and having to help advocate for my parents and then try to advocate for my students without seeming as though I'm going against my colleagues became extremely frustrating, because those parents have so much more information about their children than we have for the little few hours we have them. If we would allow them the professional courtesy to speak on the language or the level that they have about their children, and then use our educational expertise to help develop their educational goals, I think that things could be just a little bit different. Okay. And so even understand that people have different roles as parents.
Right.
Parents need to be educated about not just the law, but the resources that are out there that are available to help them with their children when they leave the local school setting. Because I still have to deal with my child disabilities when they come home.
Right. Right.
I wasn't, no parent is born with a manual how to take care of their child, and definitely not how to take care of a special needs child.
Right. Right.
And these kids, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
And these students get treated differently.
Yes.
In the system. They say that they don't, but they have them kind of like unidentified as abnormal and normal. So if you're regular ed, you're normal. If you're special ed, you're abnormal. And that's not always the key, because there are 13 disabilities.
Right.
So depending on where my child falls, does not necessarily mean that they're not going to be able to function in a normal education environment. They may just need some different accommodations to help them do that.
So the whole system, the more you talk and I hear you speak, the whole system needs to be revamped.
Oh, yes.
I mean, from A to Z. It's time for a new reckoning in public education, particularly public urban education.
Yes.
And it just seems that we keep talking around the edges, around the fringes, around the fine tuning and tweaking, but we never get to the real hard issues. And we're not willing to do the heavy lifting and to do the work of equity and reform. So we keep just kind of playing with it rather than taking it seriously. Mark, what do you think?
Well, it's more than just the school system itself. It's actually society as a whole has gotten away. If you notice, what Sandra was saying is we just put broad labels on kids. We don't talk about individuals anymore. We're starting at the group level, and change can't happen at the group, because what you're doing is taking away the sanctity of the individual. You're taking away individual responsibility, individual accountability even. People are people and they have individual needs, and we need to start with that and work with the kid that from his own need standpoint, not just that he's in a label, oh, you're special needs. And we're having that trouble in society as a whole. We want to take people's responsibility away because we know better than they do. We're not going to take into account, it's too complicated to take into account that individual's needs. Let's just put slap a label on them and treat them all the same. That doesn't work, and it's not how we can bring about social change.
So let me just put the question out there, I think is behind most of this. When the school district was still 50-50, 50% children of color and 50% Anglos, you could have this conversation about what we needed to do and how we needed to change. And there would be movement, there would be organization, there'd be coming together and building of coalitions to make it happen. Now that the school districts are predominantly children of color, the majority is the minority now, the minority is on the majority rather, it seems to me that there is no real sense of urgency around fixing it for the majority of the children who are suffering, because quite frankly, they're children of color, even though we say that's our future workforce that must be educated, et cetera, but we don't believe that. We don't do anything to really make that happen. So it seems to me that we have truly backed away from only giving the public urban education system lip service, because we don't follow through on what we say we need to be doing for the bulk of these children. Whether it's living in poverty, whether it's all the going to school hungry, we can fix this. But there doesn't seem to be, even starting with early childhood education, we don't have a willingness, it seems, to do this.
We used to agree on things and move towards a solution. Right now, all we do is blame somebody for the problems that exist. So once we slid into the blame game, then we're just finger pointing and we're not working together to solve the problems and taking the action that you're espousing. And I think that's the big issue here, is we need to get back to the basics of, there's the individual kid that needs some help. Somebody's coming to school hungry. What can we do to help this kid? And how can we make change last? And we can't do the blame game. It is what it is. And it got there because of however it got there. And even then, everybody's individual. Everybody got here in a certain way, or a certain, we don't need to worry about that. We need to worry about where we go forward, I think.
There's enough literature and studies been done, so we know what the issues are.
We know how people got here, and
we know.
Yeah. But
So
let's
let me
don't
ask you-
relitigate that. That's already been litigated.
We also need to own the fact that we need to start thinking different, because what used to work is not working anymore.
Right.
And so thinking differently means that we have to own the fact that every stakeholder at the table may need to look through fresh lens and readjust what they may think needs to happen opposed to what they know should happen. And that's going to take a little bit more of ownership, and that people are not wanting to own their rightful role, even as they are a stakeholder. You're at the table, but you're not making a difference at the table.
Well, and you're at the table, you're invited at the table, you have a seat and a chair at the table now, but what I'm seeing in these meetings, all voices around the table are not equal.
Yes.
All voices around the table are not taking the same level of authority and equal. And so you have this disparity even in bringing the group together, because this is my phrase, I'm a child of the 60s, because the master still is intent on being the master. Even though he has invited you to the table, you have a seat at the table, I can disregard what you say because I'm still in charge and I know better. And so what I've always said is that the lesson to be taught is that because the master is always intent on being the master, it is always therefore incumbent upon the oppressed one to initiate change.
Yes.
I can't wait for the system to change. I can't wait for the leadership of who's running the system to make those changes. We in our communities and neighborhoods have to initiate that change. We have to organize. We have to do the things we need to do, show up, stand up, speak up, and follow up that we need to do to make this happen.
Yes.
Otherwise, we're going to have the same discussion 5 years from now and it'll be the same issues.
Yes.
We are.
Most definitely.
So in the time we have left, let's address where do we see this going. And I'm gonna turn to the Reverend Hall first, because the Organization of Black Educators have really raised some good stuff even in the recent years. And I think of one particularly, and help me, Reverend Hall, HAPSI, NAPSI, and TAPSI. Is that right? The Houston area Black educators, the Texas Black educators, and the National Black educators. They have seemed to want to play a bigger role in this game, to challenge, to question, to stand up. But it seems like every time they get started, it's like a start and a stop. They take 2 steps forward, they take 3 steps backwards. So it seems to me that, as you were mentioning, if our communities and neighborhoods, our churches, our pastors, our educators, even our retired educators in the Black community, the depth and wealth of retired educators and retired principals, if they all got together and
Yes,
decided we're just not going to take and accept this anymore for our
Yes.
children.
yes.
That's
And
the-
I really think, I want to just say this real, I really think, and I'm going to say this, I believe that the church is going to have to take a greater stand.
yes.
Because in the past, that's where that's where the change came from. That's who initiated the change. And so we even as pastors can no longer be afraid of speaking out to change the culture of our own communities.
Yeah.
We have to come together on one accord and collaborate. Small churches, mega churches.
Right.
It can't be a competition anymore. It's about one voice for one cause, because all these persons affect our future, these
Right.
little children.
We
And
have to put
and the
God
cause
back
is-
in the equation, Larry.
Yes,
Yeah. Put God back in the equation, because the cause is saving our children.
yes,
Exactly.
Saving our children, saving
It's
all
that
our
important.
children, not just some.
yes.
All right, Mark. So in this world of bringing in the churches, the neighborhood, the community, the educators, there's a role for business and for corporations to play in this, is there not?
There is, and we need to leverage corporations, leverage businesses to do the right thing. And I think there's a move on to do that. There's a fundamental movement to put God back in the church, to put God back in education, and to put God back into business organizations. Businesses are really driven now by ESG, by the focus on the environmental, the social, and the governance aspects of running a company. It's no longer acceptable to hide behind the fact that I'm trying to make the most money from my investors. Well, at what cost to the individual? And I think we have a good chance of using ESG to make corporate culture responsive to education and helping to make changes there.
All right, we're out of time. It all went too fast. I want to thank you both for joining us here on Dialogue Houston. I'm sure we're going to have more of these conversations going forward, but I want to thank you very much for being part of this dialogue. A few quick closing thoughts. I think we need to change the themes of what we're trying to address. I think the tone and the frame of how we get at these questions to get to the solutions really starts with many times asking the question behind the question, asking the hard questions, how people come to the issues based upon their daily lived experiential realities must be taken into consideration. There's a lot of emotion and anger and frustration going on now around these issues, and we can make a difference by allowing people to have their voices heard. What most people are looking for is a sense to be accepted, to belong, and be part of a community. They want validation. They want to be seen and heard. They want to know that I matter. They want to understand that I have human dignity, and I, as a human being, are fighting for the humanity of my children, my community, my neighborhood. It is part of this wonderful desire as human beings, as children of God, to be accepted, to have security, to have understanding from each other, not just to be tolerated, but to be accepted, not just to be spoken about what needs to be done, but to actually take action, to have risks, to take risks, to stand with others in solidarity, to work with others to achieve these goals. We have come through this horrible period of racism, Jim Crow, education, police brutality, all of which is still with us. We have those factors in our community every day to deal with, but we can make a difference. The path forward is hope. The path forward is looking at how to increase civility, how to increase equity, how to become truly a path forward that leads to the realization of the beloved community that Dr. King spoke of. We can do this. It is about the common good. It is about how we get there. And so we're going to continue this wonderful dialogue on Dialogue Houston, along with all our friends and partners. Again, thank you, Mark and Reverend Hall, for this. And we're going to go dive in a little deeper as we go. But to do that, we need all of you involved. So until we come together next time, stay well, be safe, peace, power,